My dashcam filmed a dogman crossing a remote Alaskan highway at 1947 on October 28, 2019. I'm a 17-year Alaska State Trooper with Marine infantry background. I know what I saw. I was responding to a welfare check near milepost 87, 2 hunters missing, camp destroyed. When I arrived, the tent was shredded from the outside, gear scattered, and tracks pressed deep into frozen moss. 14 inches long, 5 toes, 8-foot stride. Something walked upright, circling that camp repeatedly. Driving back, my headlights caught it. 7 feet tall, dark fur, wolf-headed. It bounded across the highway in 3 strides. Eyes flaring green, looking directly at me. Aware, intelligent. My dashcam captured everything. But when I submitted the footage, officials called it a bear. Then the file corrupted on the state server. Decades of similar reports all buried. I found a pattern they don't want anyone to see. What's really out there and why won't they admit it exists? My name is Garrett Novak. I spent 17 years with the Alaska State Troopers before I retired in 2020. And before that, I did 4 years Marine infantry, 2 tours, came home. I decided I wanted to keep serving, but somewhere I could actually see my kids grow up. Cantwell seemed like a good fit. Small detachment, good people, close enough to Anchorage that my wife could visit family without it being an ordeal. I thought I'd seen enough strange things overseas that nothing in Alaska would surprise me. I was wrong about that. I'm telling you this now because I need you to understand what kind of person I am before I tell you what I saw. I'm not the guy who believes in UFOs, or Bigfoot, or any of that. I don't read conspiracy theories. I've spent nearly 2 decades documenting accidents, interviewing witnesses, writing reports that hold up in court. I know the difference between a bear standing on its hind legs and something else. I know what exhaustion and fear can do to perception. And I know that what I'm about to describe happened exactly the way I'm going to tell you, whether anyone believes it or not. The Denali Highway is 135 miles of gravel, connecting nowhere to nowhere. It runs east-west across interior Alaska, from Paxson to Cantwell, cutting through some of the most remote country left in North America. Beautiful, if you like that sort of thing, tundra and spruce, mountains in every direction, the kind of views that make tourists pull over every half mile to take pictures. But it's unforgiving country. Cell service dies the moment you leave pavement. Help is measured in hours, sometimes days, depending on weather and where you break down. We had maybe a dozen permanent residents along the whole corridor, a handful of lodges that closed after hunting season, and during winter, sometimes days would pass without a single vehicle making the drive. This was late October, 2019. Tail end of hunting season, that narrow window when the snow hasn't made the parl. Road impassable yet, but everything already feels like winter. Darkness comes early up here that time of year. By 6 p.m. you're running headlights, and by 7 it's full night. The kind of darkness you don't get in cities, where you can't see your hand in front of your face without a flashlight. Troopers take welfare checks seriously out here. Someone calls in, worried about a friend or family member. We respond, even if it's probably nothing, because sometimes it isn't nothing. People vanish in country like this. Their car goes off the road into a ravine and nobody finds it until spring thaw. They get turned around hiking, break an ankle, and by the time we locate them, it's too late. Or their heart gives out and they're 50 miles from the nearest defibrillator. The land doesn't forgive mistakes, doesn't care about your experience level, or how well prepared you think you are. I'd done maybe 30, 40 welfare checks on the Denali Highway during my time in Cantwell. Found stranded hunters, tourists with blown tires, once an elderly couple whose RV had quit on them and they'd been burning furniture to stay warm while they waited for a tow. Routine stuff, mostly. The kind of calls where you're cold and annoyed, but everyone goes home safe at the end. October 28th, 2019, started as another routine call. I remember thinking I'd be home by 9, maybe 10 if the road was bad. Help some hunters change a tire or jumpstart their ATV, file a quick report, done. My wife had made chili that morning, and there'd be leftovers. My oldest had a math test the next day I'd promised to help her study for. I should have been home by 9. Instead, that night changed everything I thought I understood about what lives in the interior, and I'm still trying to make sense of what it means. Dispatch called at 18:32 hours. I remember the exact time because I was filling out paperwork from a speeding ticket I'd written that afternoon, and I just looked at the clock, thinking I could finish before shift ended. Cantwell Unit, we have a welfare check request, Denali Highway vicinity of milepost 87. I picked up. This is Novak. Go ahead. The dispatcher's voice was steady, professional. Hunting party out of Paxson called in about 90 minutes ago. They reported finding an overturned ATV and what looks like an abandoned camp approximately 2 miles south of the highway, old mining access road. Requested we check it out, said they didn't want to stick around after dark. Any injuries reported? Negative. They said the camp looked abandoned, but recently occupied gear still there, no people. Wanted someone to verify. I acknowledged and started loading my gear. Extra fuel can, emergency blankets, road flares, the heavy cold weather kit we kept for extended calls. The sun was already down, temperature dropping fast. My cruiser's thermometer read 23 degrees when I started the engine. I grabbed coffee from the station pot, told Sergeant Dvorak was heading out to 87, estimated return around 21 hours. Want backup? He asked. For an abandoned camp? I'll call if I need it. He nodded, went back to his own paperwork. I wish now I'd said yes. The drive west on the Denali Highway that night was completely isolated. No other vehicles, no lights except my own headlights, carving through darkness. Just the crunch of gravel under my tires and the occasional reflection of animal eyes in the brush, usually moose or caribou, sometimes fox. The highway rolled through long stretches of open tundra broken by sections of stunted spruce forest, everything colorless in my headlights reduced to shades of gray and black. My dashcam was running. Standard protocol, we recorded every patrol, every call, front-facing camera capturing whatever the headlights showed. Grainy video, infrared assisted to help with night visibility, time-stamped in the lower right corner. I'd recorded hundreds of hours of footage. Over the years, accidents, traffic stops, wildlife crossings, mostly boring highway patrol work. That night's footage would turn out to be the most important recording of my career, and also the most frustrating, for reasons I'll get to later. I reached the area near milepost 87 at 1914, started scanning the south side of the highway for the mining access road the hunters had mentioned. There are dozens of old mining roads and game trails branching off the Denali Highway, most of them unmarked, some barely visible. I almost missed it, just a gap in the brush, 2 faint ruts heading into the trees. I turned in, following the ATV tracks pressed into soft ground, my cruiser rocking over uneven terrain. The spruce closed in on both sides, branches scraping the doors. My headlights swept across tree trunks, dense undergrowth, the narrow trail ahead. I kept my speed down. Windows cracked despite the cold so I could listen for voices, engines, any sign of the hunters or whoever'd made that camp. The forest was completely silent. Not just quiet silent. No wind, no birds, nothing. After 17 years working in the Alaskan bush, you develop instincts about that kind of silence. It usually means predators nearby, something that's made everything else nervous enough to shut up and hide. I found the overturned ATV first. Honda Rancher, red and black, tipped on its side like someone had just shoved it over. No visible damage to the machine itself, no dents, no scratches. The handlebars weren't even bent. It was just lying there in the middle of the trail, one wheel still slowly spinning when my headlights hit it. I stopped the cruiser about 20 feet back, left the engine running and headlights on, grabbed my mag light, and stepped out into the cold. The temperature had dropped to maybe 19-20 degrees, and my breath came out in clouds that hung in the still air. I could hear my boots on the frozen ground, the idle of my engine. Nothing else. "Alaska State Troopers," I called out. "Anyone here?" No response. Just that heavy silence pressing in from the trees. I approached the ATV carefully, scanning the area with my flashlight. The ground around it was torn up boot prints, ATV tracks, disturbed moss and dirt, but it all looked old, at least a day or two. No fresh snow yet, but the forecast said it was coming. I radioed my position to dispatch, confirmed I'd located the ATV. No sign of occupants yet. The camp was 30 yards beyond, just visible in my flashlight beam. I knew something was wrong before I reached it. You develop instincts in this job, little warning signs your brain picks up before you consciously process them. The way gear was scattered, the shape of the tent, the smell. The tent was shredded, not torn by wind or collapsed under snow, but deliberately ripped open in long vertical tiers, the fabric hanging in strips. A 4-season tent, good quality, the kind that costs $500–600, and is built to handle serious weather. Something had gone through it, like tissue paper. The sleeping bags had been dragged out and torn open, insulation scattered across the campsite like snow. A cooler was overturned, contents spilled, cans of beer, packages of freeze-dried meals, a bag of jerky torn open with the contents gone. Camping chairs knocked over, a propane stove on its side, the fuel line disconnected but not leaking. Personal items everywhere, clothing, a hunting knife still in its sheath, a paperback book with pages fluttering in a breeze I couldn't feel. I called it in immediately. Dispatch, this is Novak. I'm at the campsite. Scene shows significant disruption, possible animal encounter. No human injuries visible, no blood. Site appears abandoned. Copy that. Do you need fish and game response? Affirmative. Something tore this place apart. The dispatcher acknowledged and said they'd reach out to the on-call wildlife officer. I began, documenting, taking photos with my camera phone while my flashlight beam swept across the wreckage. Here's what was strange. It didn't look like a typical bear encounter. I'd worked dozens of those over the years. Bears go for food, they tear into coolers, rip open food storage, make a mess while they're eating. This wasn't that. The cooler had been knocked over, but most of the food was still there, untouched. The jerky bag was the only thing that looked eaten, and even that could have been the hunters snacking before whatever happened. This looked like rage, or a search. Like something had gone through the camp systematically, tearing things apart, looking for something, or just expressing fury at finding humans in its territory. I moved around the perimeter, photographing everything, maintaining my training, even as unease settled deeper in my chest. The beam of my mag light caught something pressed into the moss near the tent's entrance, and I stopped. A print. Large, distinct, wrong. I knelt down, my knees cracking in the cold, and brought the light closer. The print was pressed deep into the wet tundra moss, the kind of depth that requires serious weight. 14 inches long, maybe a little more. 5 distinct toe impressions at the front, each showing a claw mark extending forward. The overall shape was canid, dog-like, wolf-like, but the proportions were off. The toes were too long, too articulated, almost like fingers. And the stride spacing was completely wrong. I stood, played my light across the campsite, and saw more of them. A trail of prints circling the tent, moving around the cooler, approaching from the tree line and departing back into darkness. I started following them, measuring the distance between prints with my boots. 8 feet, sometimes 9, between individual prints. No wolf walks like that, no dog. A bear on its hind legs doesn't maintain that kind of consistent stride length. And, besides, bear prints don't look like this. These were bipedal tracks, something walking upright, pacing around the camp in circles, like it was studying the site or working itself up to something. My hands were starting to shake, and it wasn't from the cold. I radioed dispatch again. I need those fish and game coordinates. I've got tracks here that don't match any known wildlife profile. Large canid prints, bipedal stride pattern, approximately 14 inches long with 8-foot spacing between prints. There was a pause on the other end. Then Sergeant Dvorak's voice came through instead of the dispatcher. Say again, Novak? Large tracks, Sarge. Bigger than wolf. Wrong gait pattern. Something was walking upright around this camp. Another pause. Probably a bear on its hind legs. They do that when they're investigating something. Bears don't maintain bipedal movement over this distance. These tracks circle the entire site. Well, document what you've got, and we'll sort it out with fish and game in the morning. Any sign of the hunters? Negative. No human remains, no blood, no obvious direction of flight. All right. Finish your documentation and return to base. We'll coordinate a daylight search if they don't turn up. I wanted to argue, to explain that these prints were wrong in ways that suggested something I didn't have words for yet. But I just acknowledged and went back to work, photographing every print I could find, measuring them with my hand for scale, documenting the pattern. The whole time, that silence pressed in from the forest. No wind, no animal sounds, nothing. Just my breathing and the soft click of my camera phone and the sense, irrational but overwhelming, that I was being watched from the darkness beyond my flashlight's reach. I finished photographing the scene, made one more sweep to confirm no human casualties, and retreated to my cruiser. The warmth of the heater was a relief, but it didn't touch the cold that had settled in my chest. I sat there for a moment, engine idling, looking at the destroyed camp through my windshield. Whoever those hunters were, they'd run from something. Run fast enough to abandon hundreds of dollars in gear, their vehicle, everything. I didn't blame them. I pulled out my notebook and started writing while the details were fresh. Time, location, temperature, description of scene. The tracks. I sketched one from memory, trying to capture the toe arrangement, the claw marks, the weird proportions that my brain kept insisting were wrong. When you document a scene, you're supposed to stay objective. Just the facts, what you observed, no interpretation. But I kept coming back to those prints, the way they circled the camp, the depth they were pressed into the ground. Something heavy had made those. Something that walked on two legs and had a gait that didn't match anything I'd seen in 17 years of Alaska wilderness work. I sat there maybe 10 minutes, writing and occasionally glancing up at the darkness beyond my headlights. I should have left right then. Should have driven back to the highway, called it in properly, waited for daylight and backup. That's what my training said, that's what common sense said. But something kept pulling at me. Those prints. I needed better documentation before weather or wildlife obscured them. I needed measurements, clear photos, something that would hold up when Fish and Game inevitably dismissed this as a bear. I grabbed my maglite again and stepped out of the cruiser. The cold hit harder this time, or maybe I was just more aware of it. I walked back to the campsite, moving slowly, sweeping my light across the ground. The prints were exactly where I'd left them, of course, frozen in the moss, waiting. I knelt by the clearest one, near what had been the tent entrance, pulled out my phone and held my hand next to the print for scale, took 3 photos from different angles. My hand looked small next to it. My hand is big. I wear XL gloves, can palm a basketball, and this print dwarfed it. I stood and started following the trail, my light tracking from print to print. They came from the northeast, from deep in the spruce forest where my light couldn't penetrate. Approached the camp in a straight line, confident, not cautious. Then circled, around the tent, past the cooler, back to the tent. 3 complete circuits that I could track, maybe more that had been obscured. The stride was consistent, 8 feet, sometimes 8.5. Whatever made these didn't hesitate, didn't stumble, moved with purpose and coordination. I tried to picture it something 7 feet tall, maybe more, walking upright through these woods, approaching a human camp with clear intent. My mouth went dry. The last clear print was at the edge of the tree line, pointing back into darkness. I stopped there, my light aimed into the spruce thickets, seeing nothing but trees and shadows and the faint suggestion of a game trail leading deeper into wilderness. That's when I noticed the smell. Faint but distinct. Musky, organic, like wet dog, but sharper, with an undertone of something else. Carrion, maybe, or just wild animal musk concentrated in the cold air. It was strongest here at the tree line, where the prints disappeared. I've smelled black bears before, brown bears, wolves, moose, every large animal that lives in Alaska. This was similar, but not the same. More pungent, more present, like whatever made it had been here recently, and the scent was still fresh in the cold air. Something primitive in my brain, the part that remembers when humans were prey, started screaming at me to leave. I backed away from the tree line, keeping my light aimed into the darkness, returning to the campsite. My radio crackled and I jumped, my heart hammering. "Novak, what's your status?" Dvorak's voice, routine check-in. I keyed the mic. Still at scene, just finished additional documentation of tracks. Requesting Fish and Game contact info. I want to talk to them directly about this. We'll handle that through official channels in the morning. You need to clear that scene and return to base. Sarge, these tracks. In the morning, Novak. Let's not tie up resources on a wildlife identification tonight when we've got hunters still missing. Clear the scene, come home, we'll coordinate search and rescue at first light. He wasn't wrong. The hunters were the priority. 2 men somewhere in the wilderness, probably hypothermic by now if they'd been out here since yesterday. And I was focused on tracks, but those tracks mattered. I knew they mattered. They were evidence of what had driven those hunters away, what had torn apart their camp with enough force to shred a 4-season tent. Copy that, I said. Returning to base. I took one last look at the campsite, memorizing the layout, the destruction, the pattern of prints circling in the frozen moss. Then I walked back to my cruiser, got in, and started the slow drive back toward the highway. The access trail seemed longer going out. My headlights carved through spruce forest, catching tree trunks and undergrowth, and occasionally the reflection of animal eyes, probably just rabbits or ptarmigan, but every flash of light made my pulse spike. I kept glancing at my rearview mirror. Nothing behind me but darkness and my own taillights reflecting off branches. Nothing following. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me leave, tracking my progress from the forest I couldn't see. The heater was running full blast, but I was still cold. Not from temperature, from something else, something deeper. I reached the main trail junction and turned back toward the highway, my tires crunching over gravel and frozen mud. Almost there. Another quarter mile and I'd be on the Denali Highway proper, open tundra, better sightlines. That's when my dashcam captured it. The timestamp read 1947. Movement ahead in my headlights, maybe 60 yards out. Something large crossing the road. Not walking. Bounding. 3 fluid strides from the tree line on my left to the forest on my right, covering the width of the road in less than 3 seconds. Bipedal. 7 feet tall at the shoulder, maybe more. Covered in dark matted fur, long arms, legs that bent wrong, digitigrade like a dog's hind legs, but coordinated, powerful. And the head. God, the head. Wolfish muzzle. Forward-facing eyes that caught my headlights and flared green, reflecting back at me with an intelligence that made my blood stop. Then it was gone. Vanished into the spruce on the far side like it had never been there. I slammed the brakes. My cruiser skidded to a stop in the middle of the trail. Gravel spraying. I sat there, hands locked on the steering wheel, heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. What the hell was that? My training said, document, report, investigate. But my hands were shaking, and that primitive part of my brain was screaming, and all I could think was, those eyes, those green eyes looking directly at me, aware, calculating. The dashcam had recorded it. I knew the dashcam had recorded it. Everything ahead of the cruiser, time-stamped, saved to the hard drive. I sat in silence for maybe 30 seconds that felt like an hour. Then I slowly put the cruiser in drive and continued toward the highway. My eyes locked on the forest where the thing had disappeared, my hands white-knuckled on the wheel. I didn't speed. Didn't run. Some part of me knew that running would be wrong, would trigger something. So I maintained normal speed, breathing carefully, until I reached the highway and turned east toward Cantwell. Only then, with open tundra on both sides and no trees close enough to hide something that size, did I let myself process what I'd just seen. I pulled over about 2 miles east on the highway, far enough that I was back in open tundra with good visibility in all directions. My hands had stopped shaking, but adrenaline was still coursing through me. That fight or flight response that doesn't just shut off because the immediate danger is past. The cruiser's small monitor sits mounted on the dash, connected to the dashcam system. Standard equipment lets us review footage without having to pull the hard drive. I'd used it dozens of times for accident reconstruction, checking details I might have missed in real time. I rewound to 1945, 2 minutes before the timestamp I remembered. Hit play. My headlights cutting through darkness, the trail ahead, spruce branches at the edges of frame. Normal. My speed was steady, maybe 15 miles per hour on the rough access road. I could hear the engine, the crunch of gravel, my own breathing picked up by the cabin microphone. 1946. Still nothing, just trees and darkness. 1947. There. Movement in the upper right quadrant of frame. Something emerging from the tree line on the left side of the road, approximately 60 yards ahead based on the perspective. The infrared assist on the camera gave it a ghostly quality, but the details were clear enough. Large, bipedal, crossing the road in 3 bounding strides, each one covering maybe 10, 12 feet. The gait was fluid, coordinated, nothing like a bear's awkward lumber when they walk on hind legs. This thing moved like it was built for bipedal locomotion, powerful and sure. 7 feet tall at the shoulder, maybe more. Covered in dark fur that looked matted, thick. Long arms that swung with its movement, proportioned wrong for a human, too long, too muscular. The legs bent backward at what would be the knee, digitigrade like a dog's hind legs, but coordinated in a way that suggested intelligence, purpose, and the head. The headlights caught it for perhaps 1 full second as the creature paused mid-crossing, turned slightly toward the camera, toward me. A wolfish. Muzzle. Elongated, but the skull structure was wrong for any canid I'd ever seen. Too broad, too tall. Forward-facing eyes that reflected green in the headlights, not the flat reflection you get from deer or moose, but bright, almost luminous. Those eyes looked directly at the camera, directly at me. Then it completed its crossing, disappeared into the tree line on the right, and was gone. Total time visible, maybe 3 seconds. The clearest view lasted less than 1, but it was enough. I watched it again, then again. Frame by frame on the 4th viewing, using the controls to advance 1 frame at a time through the encounter. Frame 4783. Creature entering from left, mid-stride, 1 leg extended. Frame 4791. Creature mid-crossing, both legs visible, arms swinging for balance. Frame 4798. Creature paused, head turned toward camera, eyes reflecting. This frame was the clearest. I could see the muzzle, the eye placement, the breadth of shoulders, the way the arms hung, with hands, not paws, but something more articulated, visible even in the grainy footage. Frame 4804. Creature completing crossing, mostly obscured by darkness and distance. Frame 4809. Empty road. Gone. I sat there in my idling cruiser, watching the footage loop for maybe the 6th time, trying to process what I was seeing against everything I knew about Alaskan wildlife. This wasn't a bear. Bears don't move like that, don't maintain bipedal locomotion for sustained distance, don't have that body structure. I'd seen hundreds of bears in 17 years, black bears, browns, grizzlies, even a few polars up north. This wasn't that. Not a moose, not a wolf, not any combination of lighting and angle that could make a known animal look like something else. I'd watched enough dashcam footage to know how light plays tricks, how perspective distorts size and shape. This was different. This was real. My radio crackled. Novak. Status? I keyed the mic, tried to keep my voice steady. Dispatch. I need to report a large unknown animal on the Denali Highway, vicinity of milepost 89. Just had a visual encounter, captured on dashcam. There was a pause. Then Sergeant Dvorak's voice instead of the dispatcher. Say again? Large animal crossing the highway, Sarge. Bipedal. Approximately 7 feet tall. Doesn't match any known species profile. Another pause. Longer this time. You're saying you saw Bigfoot? The skepticism in his voice was clear. Not mocking, exactly, but the tone of someone who's already dismissing what they're hearing. I'm saying I saw something I can't identify. It's on the dashcam, time-stamped 1947. I'm reviewing the footage now. All right. His voice had shifted from skeptical to irritated. Return to base, submit the footage through official channels. We'll have Fish and Game take a look. Don't tie up the radio with this. Copy. I sat there for another moment, then made a decision I didn't fully understand at all the time. I pulled out my phone, connected it to the cruiser's system, and copied the dashcam file. The whole evening's recording, from when I left the station to now, took maybe 3 minutes to transfer. I told myself it was just backup, good practice, making sure we had redundant copies of important evidence. But some part of me already suspected that official channels wouldn't want to preserve what I'd just recorded. I put the cruiser in drive and headed back toward Cantwell, glancing occasionally at the tree lines on both sides of the highway, wondering if those green eyes were watching me pass. I got back to the Cantwell detachment at 21:15. The station was mostly empty, just Dvorak finishing paperwork in his office, and one other trooper, Jenkins, getting ready to head home after his shift. Jenkins nodded at me as I came in, didn't ask questions. Probably figured I'd had a long, cold night dealing with lost hunters. If only, Dvorak waved me into his office. He's a big guy, former college linebacker, been with the troopers 23 years, good supervisor generally, fair, not a micromanager, trusted his people to do their jobs. But he was also 2 years from retirement and had no appetite for anything that might complicate his exit. So, he said, leaning back in his chair. "Tell me about your Bigfoot sighting?" I let the comment slide. I responded to the welfare check at milepost 87. Found the abandoned camp tent destroyed, gear scattered, no sign of the hunters. Large tracks around the perimeter, canid type, but wrong proportions. Stride length of 8 feet or more, suggesting bipedal movement. He was watching me carefully, trying to gauge whether I was serious or having some kind of episode. And then, on my way back to the highway, something crossed the road ahead of my cruiser. Large bipedal figure, approximately 7 feet tall, covered in dark fur. Wolf-like head, forward-facing eyes. Moved across the road in 3 strides and disappeared into the tree line. "How far ahead of you?" "Approximately 60 yards. And lighting conditions? Full dark, visibility limited to headlight range. But the dash cam caught it clearly. Infrared assist was active." He nodded slowly. "Okay, write it up. Submit the dash cam footage. I'll forward everything to Fish and Game in the morning. They'll probably want to send someone out to look at those tracks. Maybe set up trail cams if they think there's an unknown predator in the area." "What about the hunters? We still need to locate them." "Park Service found them about an hour ago. 2 brothers, disoriented but uninjured, near Tangle Lakes. They're at the ranger station now. We'll interview them tomorrow once they've had a chance to rest and warm up." Relief washed through me. At least they were alive. "Did they say what happened?" "Just that something spooked them at their camp. They decided to leave in a hurry. Rangers said they were pretty shaken up, not making a lot of sense. We'll get details tomorrow." He stood, signaling the conversation was over. "Go home, Novak. Write up your report in the morning when you're fresh. And when you're writing it, remember that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Fish and Game will want facts, measurements, clear observations. Not speculation about unknown species." I understood what he was really saying. "Don't make this weird. Don't turn this into something that will embarrass the department." "Understood, Sarge." I went to my desk, pulled up the incident report template on my computer, and started writing while everything was still fresh. Location, time, conditions, observations. I kept it factual, clinical, exactly the way I'd been trained. Avoided loaded terms like creature or cryptid. Just described what I'd seen, what the dashcam had recorded, what physical evidence existed at the scene. The tracks, the destroyed camp, the figure crossing the highway, all documented, all time-stamped, all verifiable. I attached the dashcam file to the report, noted the specific timestamp of the encounter, 19 hours, 47 minutes, and 18 seconds, through 19 hours, 47 minutes, and 21 seconds, 3 seconds of clear footage, and submitted everything through the department's evidence management system. Then I sat there for a minute, staring at my computer screen, that copied file on my phone, feeling like contraband in my pocket. I'd never done that before. Never kept personal copies of official evidence. It violated protocol, could probably get me disciplined if anyone found out. But something in Dvorak's tone, the way he'd said extraordinary evidence, made me think this footage might not remain accessible for long. I was right about that, but it would take me a few weeks to figure out just how right. I drove home through darkness, the highway empty, every shadow potentially hiding something with green eyes and a wolf's head. My wife was already asleep, the house quiet. I checked on my kids all, 3 of them peaceful, safe, unaware that their dad had just seen something that shouldn't exist. I lay awake for a long time that night, replaying those 3 seconds over and over in my mind. The fluid movement, the proportions, the way those eyes had looked directly at the camera, at me. Something was out there in the interior. Something that walked on 2 legs and tore apart hunting camps and crossed highways with the confidence of an apex predator that had nothing to fear from humans. And I'd just put myself on a collision course with people who would rather pretend it didn't exist. The following morning, I drove to the ranger station at Tangle Lakes to interview the Marsh brothers. It's about 40 miles south of Cantwell, a small Park Service outpost that mostly handles permits and emergency coordination during hunting season. The ranger who'd found them, a guy named Peterson I'd worked with on a few search and rescue calls, met me in the parking lot. "They're pretty, shaken up," he said. "Spent the night here, wouldn't go back for their gear. Said they'd rather lose everything than go near that camp again. They say what spooked them." Peterson shrugged. "Something about an animal stalking them. They kept saying it walked on 2 legs, Smelled terrible. I figured exhaustion, maybe hypothermia setting in. You know how it gets out there, darkness and cold can mess with your head. I did know, but I also knew what I'd seen on my Dashcam, and I had a feeling the Marsh Brothers' story was going to line up with my encounter in ways Peterson wouldn't want to acknowledge. The brothers were in the ranger station's small break room, drinking coffee. Terrence was the older one, maybe mid-40s, weathered face, hands that showed years of manual work. Kyle was younger, bigger build, but right now he looked smaller somehow, hunched over his coffee cup like he was trying to disappear into it. I introduced myself, explained I'd been the one who'd responded to the welfare check, found their camp. I need to get your statements about what happened out there, why you left your camp, how you ended up 12 miles south. Terrence and Kyle exchanged a glance. Some kind of silent communication passing between them. You're going to think we're crazy, Terrence said finally. Try me. He took a long breath. We've been hunting that area for 12 years, know it pretty well. Set up camp 2 days ago, everything normal. First night was fine. Second night, something started circling our camp after dark. What kind of something? That's the thing, I don't know. Never saw it clearly, not until... He trailed off, looked at his brother again. Kyle spoke up, his voice quieter. It sounded like footsteps, heavy, methodical, circling the tent over and over. We figured maybe a bear, investigating. But bears don't walk like that. This was steady, patient, like it was studying us. Did you try to scare it off? Terrence nodded, yelled, banged pots together, the usual. It would stop for a while, then start up again. And the smell, God, the smell, like something dead mixed with wet dog, but stronger. It got into the tent, into our gear. We couldn't escape it. Second night was worse, Kyle continued. The footsteps got closer. We could hear it breathing outside the tent, heavy, deliberate breaths. And then these vocalizations. Not growls exactly. More like, I don't know how to describe it, guttural sounds that almost seemed like they had structure, like language, but not human. I was writing all this down, keeping my expression neutral. What time did this activity occur? Started around 10 p.m., went on for hours. We barely slept. Then around 3 in the morning, it just tore into the tent. Terrence's hands were shaking now. 1 second we're lying there terrified. Next second, the tent fabric is ripping open like paper. We grabbed our headlamps and ran. Did you see it? Another exchanged glance. Kyle answered. Briefly, tall, maybe 7 feet. Covered in dark fur, wolf-like head, but the body was wrong, too upright, too human in how it moved. It was standing there in our camp, backlit by our lantern, just watching us run. We fired shots, Terrence added quickly. I had my rifle, got off 3 rounds. Heard them hit, but it didn't go down, didn't even slow down, just kept coming toward us, so we ran. I looked up from my notes. It pursued you? For a while. We could hear it behind us, crashing through the brush. We just kept running south, didn't stop until we couldn't hear it anymore. By then we were completely lost, disoriented. Walked until Peterson found us yesterday afternoon. The ranger station was quiet, except for the hum of the heater. Peterson was listening from the doorway, his expression skeptical but not dismissive. He'd probably heard plenty of wilderness stories that sounded crazy until you experienced them yourself. The thing you saw, I said carefully. The wolf-like head, bipedal movement, approximately 7 feet tall. You're certain about those details? Both brothers nodded. Because I need to tell you something. I pulled out my phone, opened the dashcam footage I'd copied. Last night, responding to your camp, I encountered something on the highway. I want you to look at this and tell me if it matches what you saw. I played the footage, 3 seconds of grainy infrared video showing something crossing the road in fluid bounds. Terrence went pale. That's it. That's exactly what we saw. I spent the next 3 days waiting for Fish and Game to respond to my report. Checked my email, obsessively, called the regional office twice, left messages. Nothing. Just silence from the bureaucracy. Finally, 6 days after the incident, I got a terse email from Dr. Emil Kovich, the state wildlife biologist, assigned to review the footage. The subject line was just RE. Incident Report 19-287. The body of the email was 2 paragraphs. After reviewing the dashcam footage submitted with Incident Report 19-287, I have determined the recording to be inconclusive for definitive species identification. The subject appears to be a large mammal, likely Ursus arctos, brown bear, or Alces alces moose, captured at an angle and lighting condition that distorts apparent size and movement. The quality of infrared-assisted footage in low-light conditions is insufficient for conclusive analysis. Recommend no further action. Case closed. That was it. No follow-up questions, no request to examine the physical evidence at the campsite, no interest in the witness statements from the Marsh brothers, just a bureaucratic dismissal wrapped in Latin species names. I read it 3 times, feeling frustration build in my chest. I'd sent clear footage, precise measurements of the tracks, corroborating testimony from credible witnesses. And the response was essentially, probably a bear move, along. I called Kovich's office, got his voicemail, left a message explaining that I documented 14-inch tracks with 8-foot stride spacing, that the creature in the footage maintained bipedal locomotion inconsistent with known bear behavior, that 2 experienced hunters had witnessed the same entity over 2 nights. He never called back. I tried going through Dvorak, asking him to push for a more thorough investigation. He listened to my concerns, then delivered what amounted to a gentle warning. Garrett, you've done your job. You documented the scene, submitted the evidence, got witness statements, Fish and Game reviewed everything, and made their determination. That's how the process works. But Sarge, the evidence doesn't support their conclusion. This wasn't a bear. Fish and Game disagrees. And they're the experts on wildlife identification, not us. He leaned back in his chair. Look, I know you believe you saw something unusual, but we can't keep pursuing this. We don't have the resources, and frankly, the department doesn't want to be associated with cryptid investigations. It's not good for our credibility. There was that word again, credibility. The unspoken message was clear. Drop it, or damage your reputation. What about the Marsh brothers? They deserve to know what attacked their camp. They know what Fish and Game told us bear activity in the area. Recommend avoiding that location for the remainder of hunting season. That's sufficient. I left his office knowing the official investigation was over. The case was closed. The dashcam footage, the tracks, the witness testimony all filed away and forgotten, or deliberately ignored. That's when I started noticing the institutional pressure. Small things at first. Other troopers giving me odd looks when I brought up the incident. Conversations that stopped when I entered the break room. A comment from Jenkins about not turning into one of those guys who sees Bigfoot. I wasn't being paranoid. I could feel the department pulling away, creating distance between me and my colleagues. The unspoken message, you're becoming unreliable, obsessive, someone who can't let things go. But I couldn't let it go. Not when I knew what I'd seen, not when the evidence was clear, not when 2 hunters had fled for their lives from something that shouldn't exist according to official channels. I started researching on my own time, went to the trooper archives in Anchorage, requested access to old incident reports from the Denali Highway corridor, started reading through decades of files, looking for patterns. And I found them. October 1987. Trapper reports his dog team slaughtered near milepost 82. All 6 dogs found with broken necks, bodies otherwise intact. Report notes large wolf-like prints, stride pattern inconsistent with known canid behavior. Investigation concluded, bear attack, despite lack of typical bear predation signs. March 2003. Solo hiker reported missing near milepost 91. Camp found destroyed, personal effects scattered across a wide area. Search conducted for 2 weeks, no body recovered. Report includes photographs of large tracks in snow, described as canid type, possible wolf, unusually large. Investigation concluded, hiker fell through ice into creek, body washed downstream. November 2011. Hunting party reports, large bipedal animal near milepost 85. Submitted blurry photographs showing something tall and dark-furred at distance. Investigation concluded, misidentified bear, poor lighting conditions, no follow-up required. There were others. A dozen incidents, over 30 years, all in the same 15-mile stretch of highway. All dismissed, explained away, closed, without serious investigation. The pattern was unmistakable once you looked for it. Something lived in that corridor, something that had been encountered repeatedly, documented multiple times, and systematically ignored by the official authority tasked with investigating it. I started mapping the incidents, marking them on a detailed topographic map of the area. The cluster was centered around milepost 80 through 95, mostly on the south side of the highway where the wilderness was deepest. The frequency seemed to increase in autumn when hunting parties ventured into more remote areas. That night, sitting at my desk in the quiet station, I checked the Dashcam file on the state evidence server. Wanted to review the footage again, compare it to the historical reports. The file had been corrupted or reduced. I'm still not sure which. Instead of the full evening's recording over 2 hours of footage, there was now only a degraded 30-second clip. The crucial encounter at 1947 was there, but barely visible. The resolution had been reduced, the infrared assist seemed weaker, and the whole thing looked like a grainy, unclear mess. Nothing like the crystal-clear footage I'd reviewed multiple times. My hands went cold. I checked my phone. The copy I'd made was still there, intact, exactly as I'd recorded it. Someone had accessed the official file and either corrupted it or replaced it with a degraded version, deliberately making the evidence less conclusive, less credible, easier to dismiss. I sat there in the empty station, understanding finally crystallizing. This wasn't incompetence or bureaucratic indifference. This was intentional. Someone in the chain of command, state level, probably didn't want clear documentation of what lived in that corridor. The question was why. I started digging deeper into the historical reports, working off-duty hours at the Anchorage archives. The pattern I'd found wasn't just confined to the Denali Highway corridor, it extended throughout interior Alaska, but the density of incidents near milepost 80 to 95 was significantly higher than anywhere else. The 1,987 trapper case stuck with me. A guy named Donald Vickers, longtime interior, resident, experienced with dog teams and wilderness survival. His report was detailed, methodical, describing how he'd found his dogs arranged in a circle around his cabin, each one killed with what looked like a single blow to the neck. No feeding, no typical predator behavior, just efficient killing. Vickers had measured the tracks in snow, 14 inches long, 5 toes, stride spacing of 7 to 9 feet. He'd taken photographs, submitted them with his report. The photos were still in the file, grainy prints from the 80s, but clear enough. Those tracks looked identical to what I'd found at the Marsh Brothers camp. The investigating trooper at the time had written, "Mr. Vickers insists these tracks are not consistent with known wildlife. However, without expert wildlife analysis, we must assume bear activity. Case closed, pending Fish and Game review." There was no evidence Fish and Game had ever reviewed it. The 2003 missing hiker case was even more disturbing. A woman named Jennifer Corbett, 29, experienced backpacker from Anchorage. Her camp had been found demolished in a way that reminded me of the Marsh site. Tent shredded, gear scattered in a radial pattern, no body. The search and rescue report included witness statements from the team that found her camp. One SAR volunteer had written, "The destruction pattern is unlike anything I've seen in 20 years of wilderness rescue. This wasn't weather, wasn't bear activity. Something methodically tore this camp apart." Another volunteer noted, "Found large tracks leading away from camp toward dense forest, stride length approximately 8 feet. Recommend specialist examination." The official conclusion: accidental drowning, body lost to creek flow. No mention of the tracks in the final report. I photographed every relevant page, saved everything to a secure drive at home. If the dashcam footage could be corrupted, paper records could disappear too. The 2011 hunting party incident included contact information. I tracked down one of the hunters, a guy named Robert Chen who now lived in Fairbanks. Called him from my personal phone. "Yeah, I remember," he said when I explained why I was calling. "We saw something big near our camp, walking on 2 legs. Tried to get photos, but it was dusk. Everything came out blurry. Fish and Game told us it was a bear, but I've hunted bears my whole life. That wasn't a bear. Did you ever go back to that area? Hell no. And I don't hunt the Denali Highway anymore." Whatever's out there, it doesn't want company. After that conversation, I started making a list of everyone who'd filed reports or been involved in these incidents. Living witnesses who might be willing to talk, who might have information that didn't make it into official records. The list was longer than I expected. Trappers, hunters, park rangers, even a few troopers who'd responded to calls over the years. Most had been dismissed, their observations explained away or ignored. I was building a case file of my own. Not an official investigation, I didn't have authority for that anymore, but documentation of a pattern that stretched back decades. Evidence that something existed in that corridor, something that had been systematically concealed or denied by the institutions supposedly responsible for public safety. Late one night, working at my kitchen table while my family slept, I realized what I was really doing. I was preparing to make a choice: drop this and preserve my career, or pursue it and accept the consequences. The dashcam footage was on my phone. The file corruption proved someone didn't want this documented. The pattern in the historical reports showed this wasn't isolated or new. I thought about those green eyes reflecting my headlights. The terror in the Marsh brothers' voices. The methodical way something had circled their camp, studying them before attacking. Whatever was out there, it was real. And it was still there. I met Val Chen for coffee at a diner in Glen Allen 2 weeks after the incident. Val and I had worked together on and off for years. She was based at the Glen Allen detachment, but we'd partnered on several cases, handled joint patrols during busy seasons. She was solid, a good investigator, someone I trusted. I needed to talk to someone I trusted. "So what's going on, Garrett?" she asked after we ordered. "You sounded strange on the phone." I'd brought my laptop, pulled it out, opened the file with my research, the historical reports, the pattern map, the photographs of tracks from different years, and the dashcam footage from my phone. "I need you to look at something and tell me I'm not losing my mind." She watched the 3-second clip twice, read through the incident summary, looked at the historical pattern. Her expression stayed neutral, professional, but I could see the calculation happening behind her eyes. "Okay," she said finally. "What do you want me to say?" "That this is worth investigating, that the pattern is real, and the official explanations don't hold up." Val was quiet for a long moment. Then she leaned forward, her voice low. "Garrett, you're my friend, so I'm going to be straight with you. Yes, the footage is strange. Yes, the historical pattern is interesting. But pursuing this will destroy your career. I know what I saw. I believe you saw something. But Fish and Game made their determination. The department closed the case. If you keep pushing, you'll be labeled as obsessed, unreliable. I've seen it happen to other troopers. They latch onto something unexplained, can't let it go, and eventually they burn out or get forced out. So, I should just forget it? Pretend those tracks don't exist. Pretend the Marsh brothers weren't terrorized by something real? I'm saying you have to decide what's more important, solving this mystery, or keeping your job and taking care of your family. She paused. You've got 17 years in. 3 more, and you can retire with full benefits. Don't throw that away, chasing something that nobody wants investigated. The coffee sat getting cold between us. Around us, the diner noise continued conversations, dishes clattering, the hiss of the grill. Normal life happening while we discussed something that shouldn't exist. Did you look at the footage? I asked. Really look at it? Yeah, I did. And? She met my eyes. And I don't know what that is. But I know that officially, it's a bear or a moose, and that's what it stays. Because anything else opens doors that the department can't handle. You think they know? I think there are people who've seen things over the years, filed reports, and been told to drop it. I think there's institutional memory that says certain areas produce unexplained encounters, and the best policy is to explain them away and move on. That's not right. No, it's not. But it's reality. Val closed my laptop gently. Go home, Garrett. Be with your family. Let this go. I drove back to Cantwell that afternoon thinking about what she'd said. She wasn't wrong about the risks. I had 3 kids, a mortgage, a pension that required 3 more years of service. Walking away from that to pursue something I couldn't prove was reckless. But that night, I checked the Dashcam file on the state server one more time. The 30-second degraded clip was all that remained. My clear footage, The evidence I'd submitted had been reduced to barely recognizable shadows, and I was holding the only clear copy, stored on my personal phone where the department couldn't touch it. That's when I understood someone had made a decision about what could be known and what couldn't. I opened my laptop and started researching early retirement options. If the system wouldn't let me investigate through official channels, then I'd have to step outside the system. It took me 2 days to make the final decision. But once I did, I felt certain about it for the first time since that night on the highway. I was going to find out what was really in that corridor, even if it cost me everything. I filed for early retirement in December 2019. After 17 years of service, I qualified for a reduced pension, not as much as if I'd done the full 20, but enough to supplement other income. The paperwork took 6 weeks to process. My wife understood before I fully explained it. We'd been married 15 years, and she knew when something had gotten under my skin deep enough that I couldn't walk away. "You're going to keep looking into this," she said one night after the kids were in bed. "Not a question. I have to know what's out there." She was quiet for a long moment. "Will knowing change anything? Will it bring back the people who've gone missing? Will it make the department admit they've been covering something up? No, probably not." Then, why? I thought about those green eyes, the Marsh Brothers' terror, the decades of dismissed reports. Because someone needs to document it properly. Because those witnesses deserve to be believed. Because if I don't, I'll spend the rest of my life wondering. She nodded slowly. "Okay. But promise me you won't become obsessed. Don't let this take you away from us." I promised, though we both knew it was already too late for that. My retirement became official in February 2020. There was a small ceremony at the detachment, a plaque, handshakes from colleagues who were relieved to see me go. Dvorak's goodbye was particularly pointed. "Enjoy retirement, Garrett. Hope you find what you're looking for." The subtext was clear. Stop digging. I started interviewing people in March, quietly, carefully, using my own time and resources. I focused on the interior, Talk, Delta Junction, Healy, the small communities scattered along the Parks Highway and Denali Highway corridors. Most people I contacted were dismissive or uncomfortable, but a few opened up, especially once I showed them my credentials and explained I was documenting unexplained encounters independently. A hunting guide near Healy told me about clients who'd abandoned a successful moose hunt in 2016 after something tall and wrong had approached their camp at dusk. They'd left everything, hiked 12 miles back to the highway, refused to return. A trapper outside Delta Junction described finding his trap line destroyed in 2018, traps torn from trees, bait stations demolished, and massive tracks in snow that he'd photographed before weather obscured them. The photos showed the same pattern I documented: 14-inch prints, 5 toes, impossible stride length. A retired Park Service ranger admitted, off the record, that she'd encountered something in 2013 while doing backcountry patrols near Wonder Lake. Tall, covered in dark fur, moved like nothing I'd ever seen. I filed a report, got told it was a bear. I knew it wasn't a bear. The pattern was consistent. Multiple witnesses, credible backgrounds, similar descriptions, all dismissed by official channels. In May 2020, I drove out to Tok to meet with an Athabascan elder whose name I'd gotten through community connections. He lived in a small house on the edge of town, surrounded by spruce forest that stretched endlessly toward the Canadian border. He listened to my story without interrupting, then nodded slowly. "We've always known they're out there," he said. "My grandfather saw one in the 40s, described it exactly like you did. We call them landwalkers. Why doesn't anyone talk about them? White people don't listen, officials don't believe, and talking too much." He paused. "It's disrespectful. They deserve their privacy. They were here first." "Do they attack people?" "Only if you disrespect their territory. Push too far into their places, make too much noise, act like you own everything." He looked at me directly. "Leave them alone, and they'll leave you alone. That's the agreement. What if people don't know the agreement? Then they learn, or they don't come back." In June 2020, I returned to milepost 87 for the first time since October. The snow had melted, summer growth had taken over, and the abandoned campsite was barely recognizable. Nature had reclaimed it quickly. I parked on the highway and hiked in, carrying a day pack with water, GPS, camera, and notebook. The mining access trail was overgrown but still passable. The silence was immediate once I left the road, that same heavy quiet I remembered from the night of the encounter. The campsite was gone. No tent remnants, no gear, everything either removed or decomposed. Even the disturbed ground had settled back into natural contours. If I hadn't known exactly where to look, I would have walked right past it. But the tracks were still there. Not the fresh ones from October, those had been obliterated by weather and time, but older impressions, pressed into harder ground where seasonal flooding had preserved them. Faint, eroded, but unmistakable once you knew what to look for. I photographed them from multiple angles, took measurements, 14 inches, 5 toes, stride spacing that varied between 7 and 9 feet. The pattern led away from the old campsite, deeper into the forest, following what looked like a game trail. I shouldn't have followed them. That was stupid, reckless, but I needed to see where they led. The trail wound through thick spruce forest, climbing gradually toward higher ground. The tracks appeared intermittently, one clear print in soft moss, another 20 yards later in exposed soil. Whatever made them move through here regularly, following a consistent route. After maybe a mile, I found the structure. A cluster of spruce saplings, 8 to 10 feet tall, bent and snapped at roughly the same height. Not broken by weather or falling trees, but deliberately manipulated. They formed an arch-like arrangement, the tops woven together in a pattern that couldn't be natural. I'd read about this structure building attributed to Bigfoot in the Pacific Northwest, but seeing it in person was different. This took strength and intention. Something had shaped these trees with purpose. I photographed it from every angle, my hands unsteady. The forest around me was completely silent. No birds, no squirrels, nothing. Just that oppressive quiet that makes your hindbrain scream warnings. I was being watched. I knew it with the same certainty I'd known it that night in October. Something was out there in the trees, observing me, deciding whether I was a threat. I stood very still, camera hanging from my neck, listening. Nothing moved. No sound reached me. But the sensation of eyes on me was overwhelming, physical, undeniable. "I'm not here to hurt you," I said aloud, feeling foolish but needing to say something. "I just want to understand." The silence continued. Then, from somewhere deep in the forest, a sound, low, guttural, almost like a vocalization, but too complex for any animal I knew. It lasted maybe 3 seconds, then stopped. I didn't wait to hear it again. I backed away slowly, keeping my movements calm and non-threatening, until I reached the main trail. Then I walked steadily back toward the highway. Not running, but not dawdling either. The sensation of being watched followed me the entire way. When I reached my truck, I sat in the driver's seat for several minutes, hands shaking, before starting the engine. I'd found evidence: the structure, the old tracks, the vocalization I'd heard. But I'd also understood something the Athabascan elder had tried to tell me. This was their territory. I was the intruder. And I'd been allowed to leave. Back home in the Matanuska Valley, I spent July and August compiling everything into a comprehensive file: Dashcam, footage, photographs of tracks and structures, interview transcripts, historical incident reports, maps showing the geographic pattern. All of it organized, documented, time-stamped. I considered my options for going public. Traditional media would dismiss it outright. I'd seen enough stories about cryptid sightings to know how they got covered. Mockery, skepticism, the inevitable crazy person framing. My family would be exposed, my kids subjected to ridicule at school, my wife's privacy invaded. The Alaska State Troopers would distance themselves from me publicly while privately confirming to anyone who asked that yes, former Trooper Novak had become obsessed with Bigfoot and taken early retirement. My credibility would be destroyed, and the evidence would be dismissed because of who was presenting it. But staying silent felt wrong too. The Marsh brothers deserved validation. The witnesses I'd interviewed deserved to know they weren't alone or crazy. Future hunters and travelers deserved to understand what existed in that corridor. I found a compromise. A small independent podcast called Interior Alaska Mysteries that covered unexplained phenomena across the state. The host, a guy named Aaron who lived in Fairbanks, was professional and genuinely interested in documentation rather than sensationalism. I'd listened to several episodes. He treated witnesses with respect, focused on evidence, didn't make wild claims. I reached out through his website, explained who I was and what I'd documented. He responded within hours, interested but cautious. We talked on the phone for over an hour. He asked good questions, wanted to verify my credentials, made it clear he wouldn't use identifying details without permission. "I want to tell this story," I said, "but I need to protect my family. Minimal personal information, no town names, nothing that makes them targets. I can do that. We'll focus on the evidence, the encounter itself, the pattern you've found. You okay with sharing the dashcam footage?" "Yeah. People need to see it." We recorded my testimony over 3 sessions in September 2020. Aaron came down to the valley, set up recording equipment in my home office while my family was out. He let me tell the story chronologically, interrupted only for clarification, kept the tone serious and factual. I showed him everything: the footage, frame by frame, the photographs from the original scene and my June visit, the structure in the forest, the historical reports showing decades of similar encounters. He asked about official responses, institutional dismissal, the corrupted dashcam file. "This is going to make people uncomfortable," he said after the 3rd session. "Good. It should. I mean, in the department, maybe higher. You're essentially accusing state agencies of covering up evidence. I'm presenting facts. What people conclude from those facts is up to them." The episode was scheduled to release in NISA, January 2021. Aaron wanted time to fact-check everything, verify what could be verified, make sure the presentation was airtight. I spent the fall waiting and wondering if I was doing the right thing. My wife supported the decision, but worried about consequences. My kids didn't know the details, just that Dad had retired early and was working on a project about wildlife. In December, I got a preview of the episode. Aaron had done excellent work: clear narrative, strong evidence presentation, respectful treatment of all witnesses. The dashcam footage was included as audio description since it was podcast format, but he provided a link to view it. It felt real, hearing my own voice describe that night in October. The fear in my tone when I talked about those green eyes. The frustration when describing institutional dismissal. The certainty when I said I knew what I'd seen. The episode released on the 15th of January, 2021. The response was immediate and more intense than I'd anticipated. The podcast episode gained traction, quickly shared on Reddit, discussed on cryptozoology forums, picked up by several larger paranormal podcasts for commentary. My email inbox filled with messages. Some were supportive, thanking me for speaking out, sharing their own brief encounters or unexplained experiences in remote Alaska. Others were hostile, calling me a fraud, accusing me of damaging law enforcement credibility, suggesting I'd fabricated everything for attention. But the messages that mattered most came from other witnesses. A retired Park Service ranger named Tom Breslin wrote describing a 1,994 encounter near Wonder Lake in Denali National Park. He'd been doing a backcountry patrol when something tall and wolf-headed had crossed a ridgeline maybe 200 yards ahead. He'd reported it, been told it was a bear, watched his report get buried. "I've kept quiet for 26 years, he wrote. "Hearing your account, knowing the same thing happened to you, it helps." A Fish and Game officer from the Kenai Peninsula described finding massive tracks in 2008 that didn't match any known species. She'd photographed them, submitted them for analysis, never received a response. "The institutional silence is real," she said. "They don't want to know." A former Air Force officer stationed at Eielson wrote about a 2015 incident during survival training in the White Mountains. His team had encountered something bipedal and large that had shadowed them for 12 hours. Official report, probable bear. Unofficial reality, everyone on that team knew what they'd seen. The pattern was clear. There was a scattered, quiet community of witnesses across Alaska: law enforcement, military, Park Service, experienced outdoorsmen who'd seen things that didn't fit official explanations and been dismissed, discouraged, or ignored. I responded to everyone who seemed genuine, building a network of people who'd been through similar experiences. We shared information, compared notes, validated each other's observations. It wasn't organized or formal, Just people who'd seen the same thing finally able to talk about it without ridicule. But not everyone appreciated my going public. 2 weeks after the episode released, I received an email with no sender name, just a generic address that bounced when I tried to reply. Subject line: "Stop digging." The body was brief: "You've made your point. Going further serves no purpose and creates unnecessary complications. Consider your family and let this rest." It wasn't overtly threatening, but the implication was clear. Someone official or otherwise wanted me to stop investigating, stop talking, stop drawing attention to what existed in the interior. I showed the email to my wife. She read it twice, her expression tight. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "Nothing. I've already said what I needed to say. The evidence is out there now. People can make their own decisions." "But you're not going to keep investigating?" I thought about that sensation of being watched in the forest near milepost 87. The respect in the Athabascan elder's voice when he talked about landwalkers. The fact that I'd been allowed to leave. No, I'm done actively pursuing it. If people reach out to me, I'll listen. But I'm not going back into that corridor, and I'm not pushing for official acknowledgement anymore. She looked relieved. The truth was, I'd gotten what I'd wanted. Validation that I wasn't crazy, connection with other witnesses, documentation that would persist even if officials tried to suppress it. The dashcam footage was out there, backed up in multiple locations, shared across platforms. Whatever was in that corridor would remain there, largely undocumented and officially denied. But now there was a record. Now there were people who knew, who'd been through similar experiences, who understood that the wilderness held things older and stranger than our institutions wanted to admit. That was enough. It had to be. I'm recording this from my homestead in the Matanuska Valley, 5 years after that night on the Denali Highway. I still have the dashcam footage saved in 3 separate locations. The timestamp still reads 1947, the 28th of October 2019. Those green eyes still reflect back at me when I watch it. I'll never have definitive proof. The footage is suggestive but not conclusive. The tracks have disappeared. The structure I found could be explained away. Every piece of physical evidence can be dismissed by people determined to dismiss it. But I know what I saw. The Marsh brothers know what stalked their camp. The dozens of witnesses I've connected with know what they've encountered. There's a quiet community of us now, mostly law enforcement and military, people whose jobs put them in remote places where these things live. We don't organize or demand official recognition. We just know, and we try to warn people when we can. I don't patrol the Denali Highway anymore, but I know it's still out there. Moving through the interior's vast emptiness, crossing roads when it chooses, watching from tree lines, the landwalkers, as the elder called them. Things that were here long before us. Sometimes I think about that moment in the forest when I felt eyes on me, heard that vocalization, understood I was being allowed to leave. There was intelligence there, a decision made about whether I was a threat or just another human who'd stumbled too far. I got lucky. The Marsh brothers got lucky. Not everyone does. Those disappearances in the historical records, the camps found destroyed with no bodies, those were people who pushed too far or had bad fortune. If you travel remote highways in interior Alaska, especially the Denali Highway corridor between milepost 80 and 95, stay alert. Trust your instincts. If the forest goes silent, if you smell that carrion and wet dog odor, leave. Immediately. Don't investigate, don't try to document it. Just leave. The wilderness is not empty. There are things older, stranger, and more aware than we assume. They've learned to stay hidden in the vast spaces where humans rarely go. But sometimes our territories overlap, and they have to decide what to do about us. I was allowed to leave. I understood the warning. I've respected it since. Some roads are safer left untraveled. Some encounters are meant to remain unexplained. I still think about it every day. The green flash of reflected light at 1947, the 28th of October 2019. That's when everything changed, you can believe it or not. But if you're ever on that highway at night, and you see something cross the road ahead, something too tall, moving too deliberately, with eyes that catch your headlights and reflect back green, you'll understand why I retired early. Some things are real, whether we acknowledge them or not. The landwalkers are still out there, and they're still watching.